Welcome to What a Creep, the show with Margot Donohue and Sonia Mansfield, talking about creeps from the past to the present.
This is your quick guide to the biggest creeps, jerks, assholes, and losers, the best of the worst.
From two nice ladies who want the world to be a little less creepy.
Welcome back to What a Creep. This is Margot Donohue, and my cohort in creepitude, as always, is the amazing Sonia Mansfield. Hey, Sonia.
Hello, my friend.
Hello, my friend. We are the podcast that talks about creeps from the past to the present. You can find us on all the social medias at different places because we didn't know what the hell we were doing. We were putting all that shit together. This is your warning, by the way. We use salty language in this program, so keep that in mind if you have kiddos in the car or in the room with you. We have we have a basic Facebook page. We don't use it. We're just more interactive in our private Facebook group. You do have to ask to join the group, and you just answer a couple of questions. That'd be amazing. It's What a Creep podcast group. We're at Creep Pod on Twitter because we had Twitter somebody on Twitter had What a Creep for over 10 years and never used it. Sorry.
Great.
We're on Instagram and Threads and Blue Sky, What a Creep podcast. And we have an old-timey email, whatacreeppodcast@gmail.com. And we are always looking for suggestions for creeps and for non-creeps. And this is your first time listening. We always end the show with somebody who's not a creep. And also, you and I were just talking off the air. We have different levels of creepitude. As we say in the intro, we talk about jerks, assholes, and losers. This guy's an asshole, but he's also a huge star in the architect world. We're not taking any of his artistry away from him. We're just talking about he had some creepiness attached to him, and then he has like creepy history, and we do that a lot on this show.
Yeah, and the name, What a Creep, Asshole, and or Loser would be a really long podcast title. So we had to shorten it, and creep is, it's a good catch-all.
Yes.
Good catch-all name.
And in the Facebook group, a couple of people were talking about Anthony Kiedis from the Red Hot Chili Peppers.
Yeah.
And we did, what do we call it? A quartet of creeps, and they were rock creeps. Yeah. I think that was our first season. So we may re-release that because Anthony was definitely... A lot of the Red Hot Chili Peppers have fucking problems with women and done some shitty stuff. But yes, Anthony Kiedis, we were talking off the air. He is 61 years old and he has a 19-year-old girlfriend.
Ew.
And Michelle Wolf, we know Michelle Wolf, she was talking about it on her TikTok, and she said, I had a baby at 37. The age gap between me and my baby is younger than the age gap between Anthony Kiedis and his girlfriend.
He wasn't even born when Blood Sugar Sex Magic came out.
I mean, what?
She's just a baby. She's just a wee one.
So we may get to him, or we may replay that episode just for shits and giggles, because he actually really is. He's really fucked up.
Yes.
Sonia, do you want to tell them about the website?
Yeah, you can go to whatacreeppodcast.com, and it's everything you want to know about our podcast, but we're afraid to ask. We have links to all of our past episodes. You can open those little things. They have their own page, and they have all of our sources because we source everything we do. We're not making this stuff up. We want to give people their credit for doing all the dirty work. If you're looking for a deeper dive, that's a fabulous place to start. And we have a link to our Substack and our merch shop where you can get t-shirts and tote bags and face masks because the bird flu's coming, y'all. The bird flu is just flying in. So get those face masks while you can. That makes me depressed. Also, there's a link to our Patreon. You want to tell them about that, Margot?
Yes, Patreon. We have our first 8 seasons on the Patreon wall. We also put out 2 bonus episodes a month. So that all of you that support us there, thank you so much. We use that money really just for the subscriptions for all the news outlets that we subscribe to and just all the rigmarole it takes just to put this show together. So for all of you that support us there, and I want to say hello to Sarah, who just joined. Thank you so much for doing that.
Thank you.
We appreciate it. Another way you can show your appreciation is to leave us reviews wherever you get your podcasts. And Apple Podcasts, I want to say hello to, it's just HJAPF from Germany. 5 stars. I love this podcast so much. We're entertaining, doing a great job of tackling quite difficult subject matter and always being respectful to victims. We really appreciate you doing that.
Thank you.
And Kesselt, who also left a review in Spotify. They don't make it easy for us to find things, but y'all managed
No.
to do it. And we really, really appreciate that.
It really, really helps us find our people, and it offsets those angry 1-star reviews we get from people that are like, I don't like it when they talk about Trump.
They don't like God.
Yeah, we don't love the Lord enough for some people. So whatever. What are
We
you gonna
love
do?
him or her plenty, by the way. That's
We love them the appropriate amount.
we certainly do. Also, if you would like some stickers, did I already mention that? You can send us your address, send us via email, whatacreeppodcast@gmail.com, and I will send them to wherever you are on the planet of Earth. I just sent some to Finland yesterday.
They're adorable.
Yes. They're adorable. Everybody drink. Okay, so our creep today, he's a creep of a person. He also has some tragedy attached to him, and nobody deserves to have tragedy attached to them. We're kind of telling like a big story of a big life, of a big person who had some big foibles, let's say.
Yeah.
And that's what we're going to be talking about. Sonia, are you familiar with Frank Lloyd Wright? Are you even a fan of architecture?
I mean, I like living in a house with a roof and being sheltered from the elements. So in that way, I am definitely a fan of architecture.
But you're not like somebody that knows, like those are, yeah.
No, I'm not. But I know a lot of people who are. And I went on the architecture tour when I was in Chicago. It is fascinating.
It is.
But yeah, it's not my passion.
Well, speaking of Chicago, this is a mid-American person that we're talking about today. Frank Lloyd Wright was born in 1867. He lived to 1959, and he's a huge figure in 20th century architecture. He's known for innovative designs and philosophies. He created the Prairie School movement, organic architecture, Usonian homes. Among his top presentations, Talesian, which we're talking about today, the Guggenheim Museum, Unity Temple, and Falling Rock, which my friend Kelly has been to. It's outside of Pittsburgh, and it's amazing. He was also a mentor since 1932 to architects worldwide, but would never join the Architect Association because he thought that all architects were assholes. He was a very complicated person. This is somebody who's just got a lot going on in his personality. He's also had multiple tragedies. We're going to be talking about Taliesin in a second. He also was a narcissistic personality, and I think pretty much created a lot of his own misery. But let's get into what the trigger warning is today. Trigger warning is murder, and it's a really horrific thing that happened at his home. My sources are the History Channel, Crime Museum, This House on YouTube, The American Story on YouTube, PBS's Frank Lloyd Wright, Huffington Post, Wikipedia, Smithsonian, New York Post, Architectural Digest, and the book Frank Lloyd Wright, A Life by Ada Louise Huxtable. And he was born in Wisconsin. His father was a preacher. He was somebody who was a minister, a pastor. He kind of went all through the Christian religions. Very, very charming man. Did not take care of his family very well. They had to move a lot. He's one of those people that he would just kind of go from town to town. He would find a church. He'd start working at it. He'd basically ask for money from the parishioners. They'd wind up owing a lot of money, and then they'd have to move. On Frank Lloyd Wright's nerves, pretty much. His father left his mother when Frank was 18. And he never spoke to his father after that.
Okay.
And they left behind kids, and they were struggling financially. But his mother, Anna, was he was the king of her life. He had other sisters and siblings, but she really focused on him. Basically, from the time he was young, she encouraged him to become an architect, and she put she put pictures of cathedrals around his room. She completely, she wouldn't cut his hair, and he had these long curly, when kids have beautiful curly hair, she wouldn't touch it.
Yes.
She just thought the sun rose and set on him, that he was just everything, to the point
Wonder
that
why he was so special. Why was he so special?
just from the second he was born, she was into him. And not the other kids so much. She was a second marriage for Frank's father. His first wife died. And so he had kids from that relationship, and then Anna had to take care of them, and then she had kids with him.
Okay.
When she left, there's 6 kids, and this man just takes off, not a penny. And apparently Anna was rather cruel to the other people. You know, I can't tell sometimes when you're looking at pictures of people, especially he was born after Civil War. What used to happen when you're taking photographs is you had to stay completely still for over a minute. You couldn't blink, you couldn't move, or else the picture would get all fuzzy. So people also like the dental care wasn't all that great. So people just usually wouldn't smile in photos. So whenever you see Anna Lloyd Jones was her name, she always seems kind of dour, but I don't know if that's just the photos or just she's kind of a sourpuss. No one also, on top of all this, and like we've said before on other episodes, if it's not one thing, it's your mother.
It's your mother.
It's your mother. She just thought the sun rose and set on him, and he basically went through life like, yeah, I'm pretty goddamn special, aren't I? He leaves home, and he moves to Chicago with barely any money, and basically goes from architect firm to architect firm until he finds someone that takes a chance on him. And the person takes a chance on him is a man named Sullivan. Try finding a Sullivan in Chicago. That's rare. That's a bad joke of mine. He's had some education at University of Wisconsin at Madison. He also grew up in that area. I should also mention a big thing with his mother. They're from a Welsh family. Her side were immigrants from Wales. They're all over the Midwest, and they tend to be like, they're very stern people, very pious, very religious. They like do things a certain way. And when he was a kid, she had him spend every summer at a ranch. And if you look at Frank Lloyd Wright, you're like, this is not a rancher. But she wanted him to learn and appreciate the land and hard work. And from the time he's like 8 or 9 years old, every summer. And he said, all I learned was tired upon tired. He was also there were huge families with lots of kids and cousins and stuff like that. He also was super bright and just enjoyed all these conversations the adults had. And what it taught him, first of all, was about philosophy and art and things like that. He's like really smart people. But the hard work, he thinks, made him a high energy person. Like he could outwork anybody around him. He did not know tired. You know, the most tired ever been in his life was at this time. So anyway, he moves to Chicago. He does really well there. There's a gay man that's his boss that like takes a total shine to him. And everybody keeps saying about Frank Lloyd Wright
because he's so special. Because he's so special.
He is special though. Like he could draw better than everybody else, and he also was a good talker and could charm the living shit out of people. His boss lent him money so that he could get married and have a family, and like never paid it back. He kept going back and like borrowing more money. He meets a woman named Catherine. Everybody calls her Kitty. And she's like 18 and he's 22 when they get married. And he's like dying to get married because, you know, they're not supposed to have sex until they get married, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
He has Kitty. Kitty is beautiful, smart women. He also really, because his mother was a really smart lady too. But his mother didn't appreciate the relationship, so she moved around the block from them to keep an eye on things. Doesn't everybody want their mother-in-law to live like 2 blocks away?
Yeah, what a good time for her.
They had 6 kids in their relationship, like one after the other after the other. She was popping them out. And then she was having kindergarten at her home because she wanted them educated properly. So she was teaching all the kids to be multilingual. They could all draw. They could play instruments. They were really, really smart. What Frank Lloyd, his big invention with the prairie houses and stuff is what we would say now open concept plan. He hated boxes in rooms. His whole thing, he wanted to walk in a room, like he wanted all the walls to go away, and he wanted it to blend with the nature. Let lots of natural light come in, wood floors, and just sparse. You don't need an attic. You don't need a basement. Everything should be flat. Okay. And
all the old houses had either an attic or a basement. In California, I think most people have an attic. Yeah. And then in the Midwest, it's basements, right?
Right. Well, also because of the earthquakes, there's a lot of... He has this big open house, and he's never happy. He's always building upon building upon building. Well, he has 6 kids running around, and he's working out of that house. And it's this big studio almost. So all the voices are going everywhere, and it's noisy, and it's big, and it's active. And his wife is always really busy. because she's got 6 fucking kids. Like, she's trying to, take care of things. And she loves him. Completely loves him. Then they have a new client, and it's a man named Cheney. And he wants him for Oak Park, Illinois. They want him to build their house. So Frank Lloyd Wright, he's like, money's no option. Go for it. So Frank meets his wife, Martha, who everybody calls Mama. That's her nickname. And Mana's really beautiful, really, really smart, speaks several languages, really into feminism and the feminist movement.
And doesn't have 6 kids, probably.
She had 2. And so they start building this house, and he's working on their project for several years. They're having an affair, and they have it. They have
Boo to that, sir.
They have it regularly in their house. They get caught by kids because they have just the one open space, and so there's no place they're hiding. I mean, people.
There's a flaw in your design, sir.
There's a huge flaw in your design. And he basically says, he resents his wife because she's always taking care of the kids. She's always right.
What a creep.
And it's like, someone's got to take care of them. Someone has to look out for them. And Frank is he's like having like this middle-age life crisis. He's about as famous as he's ever going to be in Chicago. Mm-hmm. He wants bigger projects, but he's never been to Europe. He never really was properly, doesn't have those bona fides. So he says to Mama, look, you want to leave your spouse. I want to leave my spouse. Let's just go to Europe and hang out for a while and see what happens. Mama's husband's like, if that's what you want, I'm not going to stop you. Kitty was like, no, please, no, please, no. She was very upset.
She loves him, and they have 6 kids.
And they have 6 kids. They're also, I should say, he's always in debt. The guy always needs money. He can never hold on to money. No matter what big of a project he has, he always goes over. They always owe money to somebody that comes by the house. And he's also, once again, so charming that he's constantly borrowing money from people. And they just lend it to him because he's Frank Lloyd Wright, and he's very fastidious when he does design things, even like the bigger projects. Like, he really demands you live like Frank Lloyd Wright. He designed everything from the furniture to the plates. Like, there was a restaurant that he worked for that he made the design, the dresses that the servers wore. And if they tried to move anything, he'd move it back. I mean, he was very, very specific about things. He had a lot of control.
Okay.
And then there's a lot of schadenfreude that happens with him and other architects when people are like, oh, well, they're so smart, but look at that. They got leaky roofs and they've got this. And it's like, architecture does, after a while, things kind of
things shift and settle,
disintegrate and move and shift. And he had very lofty ideals, and there wasn't that much available to him, but he really pushed it. That was his whole thing. He realizes, I need to go to Europe. I need to hang out there, meet with the masters. And he also needed to go to Japan. He had a fascination with Japan. So Mama and him go to Europe. He leaves his wife behind and his 6 kids. His oldest is 18 years old. And he sees his father just leave. He leaves them with a $900 bill for the groceries. This is in the early 1900s.
Ew, that's like so much money.
It's so much money. And there's scandal upon the scandal. Oh. So the wife is stuck in Chicago with this husband who leaves, owing money. She has no idea how she's going to get it. Frank's old friends help them out while he's gone. But she does say to him before he leaves, because he's not, he just didn't care. Like, she's crying, she's upset. And he was like, what are you doing? I got to be me. I got to go. So she said, I'll give you a year. And within a year, you still want that, then we'll have a divorce. She did not come through with that. She still, he came back. But it was the scandal. Yeah. And everywhere they went in Europe, people were following them.
Recently, we just did an episode on Harrison Butker, and we talked about, the idea of, women should stay home and be homemakers, and it's, such a noble thing. It's what you're made to do, all these things. Kitty now does not have the option of taking out loans. Women couldn't do that back then. When you marry someone and have children with them, at that point you are you're trusting them to take care of you and these kids. and he's like, peace out. He's fucked her over in a really big way. She can't just be like, well, I'll just get a job and move on. Like, it's not going to work out that
There's
way
6
for her.
kids.
It's really fucked up.
It's they have to then raise each other, which happened.
Yes.
Like that, my great grandmother, her husband died, and she had a bunch of little kids, and they basically had to raise each other. But she was a woman, and it's very tough for a woman to
Yes.
make it in this world. And sometimes your husband leaves you, or something bad happens. And if you don't have those skills, if you don't have that access to at least make an income,
Yeah. And good luck marrying again. You're a woman with 6 kids.
there you go. There's also that. Frank and Mama are in Europe. Mama is in Sweden, and there's a woman named Key who's a feminist scholar, and she writes in Swedish. So Mama is actually translating her works into different languages, one of them being English. So she's in Berlin teaching English and also translating Swedish to German and French and English. Like, this woman had the mind of like 12 people in her one brain. Super smart. And he's in Paris, and then he goes to Venice. And he brings his oldest son to come out and visit him. And his son, Lloyd Wright, a lot of them became architects, his kids. But Lloyd also invented Lincoln Logs, the toys.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Right. So,
Those are fun. I used to play with those.
yeah. And he's got some people know about him overseas. Like, there was all this scandal that he left with the client's wife, and that she left her husband for the architect. It was, and in Chicago society, this is also around the time Edward Stanton, we talked about him, that he was shot by his former lover's boyfriend.
Yeah.
And he was an architect here in New York. And okay, so this is,
I wouldn't hire Frank Lloyd Wright. I would be afraid he would run off with my wife.
he would
0
have.
stars. Do not recommend. He would get a bad Yelp review from me.
His work is great. It is incredible. And but he brings home, he's always like buying stuff. He's constantly borrowing money, and then he's shipping stuff home. So he has all this Japanese art that he ships home. They come back to America after a year, and Mama's husband's like, peace, whatever,
Yeah.
He actually is pretty sanguine about it. Like, he winds up marrying somebody else and he's totally happy. And he's
a dude and he can do whatever he wants.
he could, but he also like took the kids
be nice.
over. Like, he's been taking care of the kids
Yeah.
this whole time. So they set up a pretty decent relationship that she and Frank are going to move to near Madison, Wisconsin. I think of Chris Farley, the way Chris Farley would talk. That's where he's from. Wisconsin. And he builds Taliesin. Or Taliesin. It's a Welsh word, and it's like solid brow. But it's this gorgeous estate, and it's like 800 acres, and it's 12,000 square feet. And and he also says he's going to build a house for his mother next door. So Anna comes with him.
How fun.
Yes. And Anna, she didn't like Kitty. She really doesn't like Mama. Like, she's not okay with Frank's romantic choices. Like, she's really pissy about it.
Right. And then he built a motel, and it's called the Bates Motel, and his mom lives in the house up on the hill.
She's in that rocking chair an awful lot.
Mother, no! What have you done?
He's building it up, and he still gets these assignments, but there is that scandal. So people call it the love house or the love hideaway. Like, they're followed everywhere because Kitty's still like, no, I don't want to divorce him. I don't know why. And so Mama and Frank are living at this house for several years, and she gets the kids every once in a while. And she was so into him. Like, when she was in Denver visiting family, and she said to her ex, she says, oh, hey, send the kids to Denver. They'll love it here. And he's like, oh, okay. So he sends the kids to her to Denver.
So nice.
And she just leaves him with family, kids with family, and then she goes off and meets Frank someplace. Like, she finds people to do this for her. Like,
here, kids, here's some Lincoln Logs. Knock yourself out.
So it's 1914, and they're living in the house, and it's now an estate, and it's beautiful. It's so impressive, and it's just bucolic. And one day she has the kids coming to visit, and he's going to go to. He's going to Chicago, and he's working on a project. And this is 1914. August 15th, 1914. He's in Chicago, and Mama's with her 2 kids, and they're 8 and 12. It's a boy and a girl, John and Martha. And they're visiting. And there was a couple that was working just for a little while at the house. And what was Julian Carlton? He and his wife, Bertha, I believe was her name. Gertrude, sorry. It's Julian and Gertrude. And they are probably the only black people for several miles, not, much less just the only black people on this farm. She's a cook and he's a servant. Now, some people have said that he heard some racial stuff from people there. She never said anything, his wife. She just said that her husband he was having a hard time adjusting to living in the country. They were used to Chicago. Mm-hmm. They're working at the house, and one day he says to one of the foremen, Julian, "Hey, can I have some gasoline? Because there's a spot in the carpet and that'll clean up the spot." And so they just give him this can of gasoline, and it's a summer afternoon and they're having lunch. And so his wife makes some soup, and it's Marmee and her 2 kids are in like a front porch area that's enclosed. Mm-hmm. And then the rest of the crew, they're in a separate room, in a dining room, having their lunch. So they're separated by a hallway. Yeah. It's not totally open concept there. Julian, and they were supposedly going to be fired. Like they knew they were going to be fired, or they knew that this isn't working out.
Oh, okay.
So Mama had said something to him. So Mama's just, sitting at her table having her lunch, and he takes the axe and he whacks her in the head with it twice. And then he starts chasing the kids.
Oh my God.
And the son is struck and hit right away. I mean, Mama and the son, John, die. Martha starts to get away from him, but he really starts whacking at her. He then leaves the room, and then he takes the gasoline, he sets the room on fire. And then he goes to where the men are having lunch, and he basically pours gasoline into the room and locks the door, and then lights them on fire. So the men that are in there smell this. And one thing that Lloyd Wright had, and I don't know if he changed this much, but the windows weren't as big as they probably should have been. But the men got out by like breaking through a window and then jumping out. Mm-hmm. And one guy broke his arm as he jumped out. And that's when Julian noticed they were jumping out the window. So Julian went outside. And as they were jumping out the window, like trying to get help, he was chasing people with an axe.
Jesus.
So Julian was... wife didn't know anything, but like heard the commotion.
Bananas. I've never heard this.
Yeah. So his wife like hears everything, this cacophony of sound. Martha basically burns to death in the house. The house is burning down. 2 of the men were able to run for a mile to the next property to get help.
Wow.
But 7 people died that day.
Holy shit.
And Julian took acid, drank this acid, and then hung out in the basement to die by suicide. Jesus. But it didn't work. So Julian, who wrecked his voice because he drank this acid, couldn't talk, wouldn't say anything or write anything down. He also couldn't eat or drink. So he winds up starving to death in jail 7 weeks later.
Oh my God, this story is insane.
Yeah. Frank Lloyd Wright's in Chicago, and somebody calls him. He's with his son and says, "You need to come back. The house is on fire." There's been a horrible thing. They don't mention the deaths. They just mention, they said, "Your family's in danger. The house burned down." That's all he knew. So he goes to the Chicago train station to go back to Madison. He's at the train station, and who's there but Mr. Cheney, the man who took the man's wife. And they just shook hands and it said, "I'm sorry" to the other one, because they didn't know what to say. And they rode in the same car going out to the ranch. This
and
man,
does Mr. Cheney know he doesn't
they just
know
know
what's
there's
up?
a fire. He knows that his kids
Yeah.
are probably gone because there's been a fire. He doesn't have any more information. So these reporters are sneaking onto the train and going up and
That's
down trying to
awful.
overhear what these men are saying to each other, thinking
Yeah.
they're going to have this big fight, and they're in shock. Like they don't know
Yeah.
what they're going to come upon.
Right.
And they actually had Mr. Cheney apparently handled the separation, the divorce fine. Like he met somebody else and had a decent attitude, but they were when they get to the house, they did find Julian's wife, who said, "I don't know what happened. He's been really nutty lately. He's been sleeping with the axe next to the bed. He's been hearing things. He's been seeing things." And they just let her go. They don't charge her with anything. So they just send her to Chicago from whence she came, and nobody knows what happened to her. And Julian
That's
dies
weird.
while they're while he's in jail.
Yeah.
And so, a couple of people lived, but everybody else died.
Damn.
And he's like, what do I do? And so so the poor kids, like they're sending their bodies back to Chicago. They go with their father. And then they're asking, what should we do with Mama? And he decided to bury her on the property. And so he had them make a pine casket for her, and they filled it with flowers and they buried it. And he didn't put a marker or anything. And he decided that he was going to rebuild. It's the only thing he could think to do. So he does rebuild. And then a few years later, it burns down again.
Jesus, what?
And he rebuilds it again. Yeah.
How did it burn down a second time?
The second time, it was due to faulty wiring. So,
Wow.
in his lifetime, there's electricity. There are things like elevators. There are things like, air travel. Like, it didn't occur, then. So a lot of those early things,
Is this an ancient burial ground? Like, is this shit cursed?
like poltergeist?
Don't rebuild there.
It's been there since 25, like ever since. And he's had with Taliesin, he has an architecture program, and then he has one in Arizona. And, everyone says he's egotistical. He likes to do things the way he likes to do things. A lot of what he does, if you sign up for his school, which is was a money-making venture for him, like Trump, university.
right.
He had but his whole thing was he made them work on the farm. He made them build homes from scratch. And the work that he did when he was young gave him the appreciation for what it meant, to build homes. And so that's so that was part of his deal. He goes on to have, several, like I said, huge productions. He adapts to every media thing right away, radio, television. He does tons of interviews. He's always talking about who's better than me. Nobody. I'm the best. Like huge.
My mom says I'm
My mom says I'm special. He does meet another woman after he gets, he's getting letters from people saying, "I'm so sorry to hear about your wife.
Here's a naked picture.
Right, exactly. And I love your work and blah, blah, blah." He does meet up he has a second wife who has a lot of mental health problems, and she's basically diagnosed for being schizophrenic pretty soon after they meet each other. And
So eventually Kitty gives him a divorce.
Yes, Kitty does in 1922. He left her in 1904. So
Oh, dang.
she was, she was like, she was hanging in there.
Yeah, she was like, the fuck you will.
And
She was not
exactly.
having
And
it.
eventually she was just like, okay, I gotta give up. I can't even with this guy. He marries Miriam Knoll, and they're living together for a few years. But Miriam is not like what Mama was. So, and she's not like Kitty. Kitty just wanted to be with the kids. Mama just wanted to be with him. And Miriam was like, well, she was
Just wanted to be with his mom.
His mother hated her too, but Surprise. But anyway, she had a lot of mental health problems, heavy drinking. He wasn't much of a drinker. And their relationship was just very tempestuous. And in the middle of their relationship, he meets someone named Olga. And Olga is a much younger woman, incredibly beautiful. She's Russian and can speak several languages and totally appreciates everything he does. And he wants to leave Miriam, but she's saying no. So he's then hanging out with Olga. He just leaves her. And he goes with Olga. They're going back and forth from Chicago to Taliesin. And that's...
Well, it worked, when he did that with Kitty. So
Right.
he's like, hey, man, just wait 18 years and eventually she'll divorce me.
Yeah. And so they're hanging out, and he actually is arrested under the Mann Act for transporting a woman for illicit purposes. These are laws that are still existing.
Yes.
But it gets him all in the papers, and it's this big, shocking story. Eventually, though, they get married, Olga and him. Miriam, she had a lot of problems.
Mm-hmm.
He goes on to create these incredible structures, these incredible homes. Some of them are still here, some of them aren't still here. He was someone who had a huge ego. He hated other architects, but and they hated him because he was just full of himself, but they all had to admire him because he's Frank Lloyd Wright. I mean, it's just,
The work speaks for itself.
It does.
It's pretty remarkable.
It is. And he dies in 1959, and we all still talk about him. But that's our creep this week, Frank Lloyd Wright. It's got some he's got some fun, creepiness on his own part, but also just some creepy history because the way that all went down is just...
Good job, friend.
Thank you.
I didn't know any of that. I know, I'm like, I don't know shit about architecture, but I know who he is. And I had never heard any of those stories before. So good job.
Yeah, thank you.
You want to hear about someone who's not a creep?
I sure do.
Okay. Do you know who Joseph Eichler is?
No.
Okay. He was an architect. He is known for here we go. He is someone who brought modern architecture into homes for middle class. He has built a ton of homes. There's a bunch of them around California, and they fall under the modernist architecture. They're very influenced by Frank Lloyd Wright. They feature natural materials, floor to ceiling windows, built-in cabinets, and that idea of blending indoor and outdoor space, all that stuff that you get with Frank Lloyd Wright stuff. They feel open and airy, and there's a lot of natural light and things like that. So I'll tell you why he's not a creep here at the end. So Joseph Leopold Eichler was born June 25th, 1900 in New York. He was raised in Manhattan. His father and mother ran a small toy store in the Bronx. He spent the first 40 years of his life. He got married. He had 2 kids. He was working for his wife's family's company. It was butter and eggs wholesale, and then they moved in the 40s to Northern California, and they moved into a Frank Lloyd Wright house, the Bassett House in Hillsborough. Mm-hmm. And he was so inspired that he's like, I think I want to get into architecture and real estate development. So he goes into that. So between 1949 and 1966, his company, Eichler Homes, built more than 11,000 homes in 9 communities, a lot of them in Northern California and 3 communities in Southern California. And these homes all have a certain kind of look. When you see them, you're like, that's an Eichler. Again, I don't know shit about architecture, and I'm like, that's an Eichler. I know what it is. And I picked him for not a creep because very early on, he was outspoken in his support of fair housing. He wanted these homes to be for middle class people, but also he wanted these communities to be inclusive and diverse. He wanted to include parks and community centers, and he was actively integrating homes as early as the 50s, meaning he wasn't discriminating against people, which a lot of architects and housing developments were. They were discriminating. So if you were Black or Asian, like, you weren't going to get to buy a house, and he was not having it. So in 1954, some Black families were moving into some of the Eichler communities, and a bunch of the angry white homeowners confronted him about it. And he told them, like, I'll be glad to buy your homes back. We sold it to you too cheap anyway. And of course, like, no one took him up on the offer. And then in 1958, the National Association of Home Builders refused to, like, support non-discrimination policies. This is so fucked up. Y'all know how I love to quote things. They said, it's a generally accepted theory that minority races depreciate property values. There may be no statistics to prove it, but as a representative of the home builders, it is a theory under which I operate. That's this guy, Richard Doyle. He's like the executive vice president of the National Association of Home Builders. And Eichler's like responded with, like, get fucked, basically. He actually said it way nicer than this. He said that, I think the builders cannot evade the fact that what they are doing is going to have an impact on the community as a whole, even the nation, for a long time. And they cannot say, well, I'm just a businessman and I'm here to make a buck. I wish to state emphatically that Eichler Homes will no way practice any kind of discrimination. And he resigned from that organization. He's like, I'm not participating in this bullshit.
Wow.
Yeah. And again, he started this in 1950, well before other people were doing it. He established a non-discrimination policy for his company. He offered homes for sale to anyone, any race, any religion. And he was like, I'm going to prove it that this is not something that is this isn't a money losing situation here. He's like, it's going to make money. And it did. He proved that, like, racially, desegregated housing was the right thing to do, and it was profitable. And a lot of his policies that he was doing at his company built the foundation for the 1960s fair housing policies that the government came up with. He could be very gruff when working with people in his office, but they also have stated that they feel like he was very honest and that he had a lot of ethical integrity. They felt that he was very courageous in general. Like, he would stand up for the things that he thought was right. He told them, like, if you don't support this stuff, you can't work here. So he was very clear about that. He testified in front of Congress in 1963 about, like, how he structured his companies and demonstrated that his companies were making money by doing this in hopes that it would inspire, like, other people to do that. I also love that he wanted the houses to be affordable, and to, like, back in the day, this is bananas when people are like, how come people why don't you just buy a home? Why don't you just buy a home? Some of his houses back then sold for $10,000. $10,000. That's bananas to me. Like, and now his houses here in the Bay Area, they're really expensive.
It's
like
the Bay Area.
They sell, yeah, in the Bay Area, they're really expensive. But the other houses are also in, like, the South Bay or even in, like, Southern California. They're all, because the homes are really special. They look beautiful.
Right.
They are, and now they sell in the millions. Like, recently, one of his homes here in the Bay Area went up for sale, and it's listed at like $6.4 million. He passed away, obviously, but his company has, well, let me rephrase that. His company doesn't own these homes. Like, people buy them and they sell them for millions. His homes have kind of gotten away from his original intent, which was that they should be for the middle class, because trust me, middle class here is not $6.4 million.
No.
Which is too bad. That is our non-creep, Joseph Eichler.
That's a great non-creep. So what's it? How do you spell his last name?
Eichler. And if you look up his homes, they're really fucking cool.
Oh,
like,
wow.
There's a community of them in Concord, which is where I was born and raised. for the very small window that I was looking at buying homes, I was like, oh my God, I would move back to Concord for an Eichler. Like,
Yeah.
they're really cool homes. Now, are they practical in that maybe they keep heat or air conditioning?
Right.
Probably. My guess is probably not. But they are really, really cool. So if y'all want to look them up, just Google Joseph Eichler homes and you'll see, like, they're really, really beautiful.
I'm going
They're
to definitely
super cool.
look that up. Yeah. It's just not set up anymore. I mean, that way people create trusts to buy homes now. So you don't even know who's buying them, but they could buy up a whole block and you don't know about it.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no affordable housing. Yeah.
No, here in the Bay Area, minimum looking at $500,000. And that's
it's
for like
a tiny shack.
yeah, it's like a little house. And if you're looking in San Francisco, LOL. Like it's more than that for sure. Even in the quote unquote bad neighborhood in San Francisco, you're looking at something that's out of most people's price range. It's real tough. That's fine. I like it right here in this place. So
Yeah.
that's a great example of a non-creep. And I didn't know any of that about him. It's like, I wonder if he's not creepy. And it turns out he isn't. So yay.
Well, that's our episode this week. And if you like the sound of our voices, we also co-host a show called Dorking Out, where we dork out about movies. Sonia, what are we going to be dorking out about next?
We're getting our summer on. We already talked about Terminator 2 because we wanted to do a big summer movie. And now we're going back to the beach. 1987, Annette Funicello. Was it Frankie Avalon? Do I have that right? Yeah. I'm
Pee Wee
really
Herman?
looking forward to it. Pee Wee Herman's in there. We love
Fishbone
Pee Wee
is in
Herman.
here. It's Stevie Ray Vaughan's in this movie.
Oh my God. There's all kinds of people.
It's so funny. And I started posting on TikTok and I got so many
Yeah.
people responding right away. And Instagram, they were so excited. Like, this movie's just adorable. So
This
I
was
can't
a
wait.
cable. This was like a cable staple
Yes.
back in the day. Like, it was on all the time. It totally worked for like my parents who grew up watching their stuff, and then people like me who didn't know about their stuff. I loved it too. I'm looking forward
It's
to it.
like the Brady Bunch movie in a way.
yes,
It
I was
totally.
thinking that too.
It's making fun of lovingly making fun of two different generations, but it's
Yeah.
so well done that it doesn't matter if you know about it or not. You kind of just pick up the beats and you go with it. So I'm very excited.
Yeah, it's gonna be fun.
It's going to be a good time. Okay, everyone. So remember, please send us your choices for creeps and non-creeps. We love it when you use the Annie Potts gift. We got one from Ghostbusters, or you can just be clever and think of something on your own. Our email, once again, is whatacreeppodcast@gmail.com. And Sonia, where can they find you?
You can find me at thesoniashow.com and The Sonia Show on Instagram and TikTok and Twitter and all the places. Blue Sky, Threads, sure. Go there. What's the other? Mastodon? Sure, go to Mastodon. I might be there.
Mastodon. Oh, my God. That's a long time ago. That's a poll.
Wherever. Go to Friendster. Go to MySpace. I'm there. I don't
AOL,
post very much
I
there,
am.
but do it. Where can they find you, my friend?
You can find me at Brooklyn Fit Chick. That's my site. That's where I am for Instagram and Threads. I'm at Brooklyn Margot for TikTok and for Twitter. Yes, I dead named that thing.
Yeah.
All right, friends, we'll be back next week with a new episode. In the meantime, be safe, be kind. Don't be a creep.
Don't be a creep. Thank you for listening to us talk about creeps. You can follow us at What a Creep Podcast on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
But don't follow us too closely.
You can email us your creepy stories at whatacreeppodcast@gmail.com.
But please keep your dick pics to yourself.